That's funny. All right. How was the lighting? Did you see me okay?
Yeah, I think we can see fine. We still got. Don't know. Does anybody know anybody who's supposed to be here?
All right.
4 minutes. Double there.
Okay, so I'll just put this for now.
Cool. Yeah.
And you're just seeing the screen, right?
Yeah, that's just the slides.
So whenever you want to start, let me know.
Cool. We're just 3 minutes.
Okay.
That works.
Perfect.
Just in case somebody's late, because somebody's always late. Brilliant. Okay. I'll just put it on mute at the moment.
Sure.
All right. No worries.
Teaching Eric, don't log out, just get going.
It's always been late.
It's not bad for a couple of weeks earlier. That wasn't the day. So we'll just kick off then. Yeah.
As well, I think, rather than standing around looking at me. So this is the Scottish Blockchain Meetup, as it's now been rebranded. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming along. There's a few people here who have been to quite a few before, and there's definitely new faces here as well, which is fantastic. So to give you some background, this group has been going for I don't know, 2.5 years roughly. In the very early days, we were very much all about Bitcoin, and I remember those early meetups where, some of us here were at them, where everybody was delighted with the price of Bitcoin, go through the roof. Over the past 2 years, that's been a bit of a bumpy ride, and then it's evolved over time to very much the narrative has changed around this technology and what it represents, I think it's fair to say. So certainly in 2016, what we've seen is a significant shift. And it started last year when Wall Street and the city started moving towards this and going, actually, this is nice, but we want to have our own permissioned private blockchains, to the growth of Ethereum, kind of bubbling away in the background and then fundamentally coming out with a platform, Turing-complete platform that's significantly more powerful in some ways than Bitcoin, and yet it's untested in many ways as well. So there's a huge, and that's just talking about these two, Bitcoin and Ethereum. There's so many other technologies out there. The one thing that we definitely have in Scotland is a huge number of incredibly intelligent people, I think. I'm excluding myself from that, but there's loads of great universities, there's loads of great startups, and the entrepreneurial scene around here is fantastic. We just need to pull all this stuff together, the funding, the ecosystem, the startups, the entrepreneurs, the technologists. And that was basically part of the reason for the meetup. So after a couple of months off, I'm delighted that we're up and running again. We will have a wider remit, I think, going forward. So it's not simply Bitcoin, but it certainly does include Bitcoin. That's pretty much it. Before this started, I thought, I wonder if I should say something and think about what happened since the last time we kind of met up. And I started writing it down, and it was just ridiculous. I mean, we're talking about the number of Ethereum nodes surpassing Bitcoin, 21 Inc.'s plan to make every computer a Bitcoin computer, the scaling debate, will it, won't it happen in terms of Bitcoin, the whole Deloitte stuff, with the smart identity stuff, that we've had Lightning, or we've got the early stages of Lightning, we've got the early stages of Thunder, for those of you that are following those. Coinbase moving to, or starting to embrace Ethereum. This last weekend, all the blockchain evangelists back off to Necker Island to have a lovely weekend with Richard Branson for the second time. We've got the half moon coming in the next course, Satoshi was unmasked again, and then disproved again, so who knows what's going on there. And then we've got the DAO raising $173 million for a completely incredible kind of model, if we can call it a model, an incredible concept. However, let's talk about tonight. Let's talk about who we've got joining us tonight. I have, hopefully, a biography on my phone, which would make it a lot easier. I'm absolutely delighted tonight to welcome William Mougayar along. I've probably been aware of William for a long time. There we go. That's better. I'll move the screen so you can see a few more people as well. Yeah, I've probably been aware of William for a long time because certainly on the abc.com website, I've always, on his blog, I've seen William commenting a lot on that over the years. And then about, I think, over 2 years ago, between 2 and 3 years ago, I remember reading an article by William about the stages and the steps that were required for Bitcoin to evolve and become more significant and, I suppose, breakthroughs to the mainstream. And since then, William has written a huge number of articles that are very intelligent and very reasoned and from a very good viewpoint, a very different viewpoint to a lot of the viewpoints that perhaps were shared by some of the more ideologically kind of focused members of the community at the time. It's been hugely informative, and he's followed that up this year with a book which I hope all of you will read if you haven't already, called The Business Blockchain, Promise, Practice and the Application of the Next Internet Technology. Just to give you some background, which I'm cheating by reading the Meetup site, but William is the general partner at Virtual Capital Ventures, an early stage venture capital fund, and currently sits on the board of directors of OB1, the open bazaar open source protocol that's pioneering decentralized peer-to-peer commerce. He's a board advisor to the Ethereum Foundation, a member of the OMA's Ventures Board of Advisors, and advisory board member to CoinCenter, the founder of Startup Management. It's fair to say William has a finger in a lot of pies, and is quite keen on Ethereum, and he has a lot of experience, so I'm going to shut up now, and I will pass across to you, William, and we'll take it from there, and I will check the levels, but please feel free to start.
Great. Thank you very much, Doug. There is an echo, but it doesn't bother me that as much as long. Oh, actually, yeah, there's an echo.
I'll put us on mute at the moment.
All right. Okay, this is better. Thank you. Just to get a feel for everybody. Hi, everybody. I am William Mougayar, and I'm dialing in from Toronto. It's 1:30 in the afternoon, so it's still sunny out there. Just to get a feel for the audience, can you tell me roughly how many of you are in the technical side versus the business side? So first, let's maybe by a show of hands, how many would consider being in the technical side, meaning that you have developed and programmed something to do with Bitcoin or the blockchain? And yeah, half and half. So what's the mix, Doug, between business and technical from your perspective being there? Maybe it's 50-50, it seems like it. Okay, that's fine. Great. So I'm going to spend the next 25 minutes or so giving you some highlights from the book and some of my latest thoughts on the blockchain and where it's going. And then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So let me switch to the, what I'm going to do, because we haven't figured out how to do, how to keep me on the screen and show the slides. I'm going to be flipping back and forth between slides and myself. So the way I like to start is by thinking that the blockchain is really about three different things that have come to full technology, quite technology. but it also has business implications, and it also has legal ramifications that are profound. And the mistake that I see some people do is that if you look at it only as a technology, and if you ignore the business and the legal aspects in terms of what the impact is, then you're only using maybe a third of the potential of the blockchain. And I see this happening a lot in the banks, and we'll come back to that point, where some of the banks, because they are highly regulated, they start by saying, well, I don't want to change the regulation. I want to start with my current regulation. And they might say, well, I don't want to change my business. I'm happy the way it has been for the last 100 years. So let's just look at blockchain just as a technology. And this is one of the drawbacks of some of the implementations out there. So the way to view the blockchain is by looking at it holistically as a technical underpinning, as a business underpinning, and as a legal underpinning as well. So I just offered 3 different definitions. And on the technical side, yes, you can see it as a backend database that can maintain a distributed ledger openly. As a business, you can see it as an exchange network for moving value between peers. And the peer-to-peer aspect is very important. And if you look at it from a legal perspective, you're seeing this as a transaction validation mechanism that does not require somebody in the middle to assist the blockchain is really more than just a distributed ledger. So this is so I'm just starting with this introduction because many large organizations just see it as a distributed ledger. Again, picking on the banks and the financial services because that's where there's lots of activity right now. Many of them are referring to the blockchain as a distributed ledger technology. And yes, it is a distributed ledger technology, but it's not only that, it's a lot more than just a ledger technology. And some other folks on the consumer side, they see it as a cryptocurrency only. And they just talk about it as a cryptocurrency. But these are really only 2 of maybe 10 different characteristics and facets of the blockchain. And I like to say that the blockchain has many characteristics, has many personalities, in the same way as the internet today has many personalities. And if you asked each one of you, what is the internet for you? You'll probably get a different answer. Some of you will see it as a publishing platform. Some of you will see it as a communications platform. Some of you would see it as a social media platform. Some of you who are programmers would see it as a development platform, and the list goes on. The blockchain is no different. It is a cryptocurrency, yes. It is also a computing infrastructure because it is comprised of all of the different computers that power the blockchain as an infrastructure. It is also a transaction platform because you can validate transactions. It is also a decentralized database. Every time you change the state of information on the blockchain, it's like having a small database out there. Yes, it is a distributed accounting ledger. It's also a very interesting, we'll talk about that in a minute. It is open source software. The 2 top platforms today, Bitcoin and Ethereum, are really based on a lot of open source innovation. All the contributions are coming from different contributors. It is not all coming from one central place. Number 8, it is a financial services marketplace. And it is also a peer-to-peer network because it allows one person to conduct business with another person without having anybody in the middle. And at the end of the day, what the blockchain is giving us is a trust services layer. So it is really about trust. It is trust that is being disrupted with the blockchain. And if your current function has anything to do with trust, then there is going to be disruption going forward. And I'll come back to it in terms of the different services that we can imagine on the blockchain that have to do with trust. And now, let me just switch gears a little bit and tell you how I view the blockchain. And the way I like to view it is that it is on par with the web. So if you think about the web and what has happened in the last 20 years, if you think about it, the web came along and the web became a platform that was really on top of the internet. So the World Wide Web is really an overlay that came on top of the internet. And blockchains and the blockchains technologies are really another overlay, very similar to the World Wide Web, but they are now sitting at par with the web. And the implications of that is that now, if you think in terms of applications, because the web came along and then we started to develop a whole variety of web applications that depended on the World Wide Web as a protocol. The same thing with the blockchain. The blockchain and the blockchains, I'm using that generically, whether it's Bitcoin or Ethereum or other ones, it doesn't matter. They all have a protocol and they are all there so we can write applications on top of these blockchains. In the same way as we have web applications, we are starting to see blockchain applications. And there are two flavors of blockchain applications. There can be native blockchain applications, or they could be hybrid, meaning that they might have 1 foot as on the web and 1 foot on the blockchain. And we'll go into some examples in a minute. Now, if you take this one step further and you think of the fact that, yes, the internet is public, but there are lots of private networks as well. And in the same way that we had public web applications and private web applications, we're going to also have private blockchain and public blockchain applications. And then if you think of the hybrid variation that I gave you earlier, so there could be applications that have some web side to them and some blockchain side to them, both in the private settings and in the public setting, then you really have 4 types of blockchain applications. And that's really what is going on right now. I am seeing innovation in all these 4 segments. And it's important to understand the segmentation because each one of these implementations is slightly different. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about financial services, and then we'll come back and tie it back together. Doug has asked me to talk a little bit about financial services. If you think about what happened in the last 10 years or so, we've seen a lot of innovation in the fintech space. This is before blockchain. And we could argue that the fintech movement and all of the startups in the fintech space came along because the banks did not innovate in the first 10 years of the internet. If you think about it, between 95 and 2005 or so, what did the banks give us? They gave us online banking, so we can check our online statements instead of getting them on paper. And we can pay bills online. So yes, we are licking less stamps. And maybe recently, if you're lucky to have one of that service in one of the banks, you can take an image of the check if you want to deposit a check. And that's enough. You don't have to go to a teller or to a banking machine, and that's enough. So the banks really did not innovate too much with the internet. So the result of that was that a number of startups entered the scene and attacked the bank. And that phenomena is called unbundling banking, whether it was in the US or in Europe. And you know these names as well as I do. In Europe, there is Squirrel, Lendico, Moni, and so on. And the list goes on, and there are more of them coming on the scene, especially in the loan area, lending and peer-to-peer movement of money. PayPal having started that, TransferWise, and so on. All of those are at the periphery of banking, but their numbers are staggering of the business that they are doing. And they all have attacked the banks, and the banks did not feel it at the beginning because they were all very small. And they seemed harmless at the beginning. But now you wake up and you look at and it is quite daunting. The point of this introduction to fintech is that the same thing is going to happen with blockchain. A few months ago, I put together this of blockchain companies in financial services. This is just blockchain in financial services only. And there are close to 300 companies on this slide. And many of them are small, and many of them are probably insignificant in the eyes of the banks. But in the same way as fintech started that way, and now we have big companies like PayPal, TransferWise, and others, the same thing is going to happen with blockchain startups. A dozen or so of those will become large and will become significant. So that is the warning that is going to financial services companies. And if you were to think of an evolutionary path in terms of what might happen with how the blockchain is going to infiltrate financial services, if you can see this here in the middle, there's lots of activity today in the trading and capital markets. That is where a lot of the banks and the financial institutions are spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to shrink the clearing and settlement time frame. The capital markets segment is huge. It has been called as a quadrillion dollar opportunity as a marketplace. And yes, rightfully so, there is going to be a big market in using the blockchain in the capital market space, in the area of bonds, derivatives, over-the-counter, commodities. But there's also other parts of financial services that will also be disrupted. There will be business-to-business services where the blockchain can infiltrate. There are consumer-facing services as well, specifically with identities. And then there are lots of back-end services moving up that chart where the banks will look at it as a cost saving. And then finally, there will be some inter-industry processes that will challenge the existing ones, like SWIFT. And some of these examples include R3 as a consortium of banks, and what they are focused on is on interbanking processes. So that is one way to depict how the blockchain will infiltrate banking. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about regulation and what might happen with regulated environments and innovation. It's a pet peeve of mine to pick on the banks again, because they are highly regulated and many of them do not want to change the regulation. But my point here is that if you want to innovate inside of regulation, then you will be quite limited because the blockchain is a permissionless innovative technology. And as a starting point, if you don't constrain the blockchain with regulation, then you will be able to innovate in those unregulated environments, or at least outside of the regulated environments. I'm not saying that regulation is all bad continuously, because regulation is good to some extent because it can protect the consumer and it can protect the market at large. and it could bring some efficiencies. But if the starting point is regulation, and if we see that as a controlling element, then we are going to limit the potential of the blockchain. What I would rather advocate for is I would challenge the regulators themselves to be innovative themselves. And I look at regulation to be innovative also. And in discussions I'm having with some regulators, they are starting to understand that it is better to be innovative and then wait before applying the old regulation to this new technology. Because the risk is to have confusion. Can you imagine today there are maybe 200 regulatory bodies throughout the world. Every country has a specific regulatory entity that is mandated to regulate financial services. And if each one of them interpreted in their 200 different of regulation that may not all concur with each other. 200 is a lot. It's more than the flavors of ice cream that you and I can maybe name in a few minutes. So the idea here is we need new regulation instead of applying old regulation. And we need to wait blockchain technology matures a little bit more. And the risk here is that if we centralize regulation again too much, then we are defeating the purpose of what the blockchain is going to give us. And finally, there's one other point, which is to think about where do you insert the blockchain in the process. So if there's an end-to-end process that starts here and ends there, and if you don't want to change anything until the very last part of the process, and innovate throughout the whole process. And this is what's happening today when banks come in and even clearinghouses, they say, well, we don't want to change the regulation. And they say, we don't want to change where the digital assets start, but let's apply the blockchain at the tail end of the settlement and the clearing. And maybe we'll get a 20% benefit. Maybe we'll improve the speed, or maybe we'll save a little bit of money. But this is only the beginning. I think the innovation will come when you start end-to-end, when you have digital assets on the blockchain from the get-go, from the beginning. An example of that particular situation is a company in London, in the UK, called Clearmatics. If you've heard of Clearmatics, they are developing a DCN, a decentralized clearing network, which will have specifically on over-the-counter derivatives. And that is going to be a new network that will start with zero number of customers and zero number of transactions. And it will grow accordingly because everything is going to be native. The blockchain and will end on the blockchain. And that's where we get the most innovation going forward. Another question that people ask me is like, what can you do with a blockchain in terms of services? So I've come up with this chart, and I call it the proofs pyramid, because at the end of the day, the blockchain is a proof mechanism. It's a technology that allows us to prove that something happened, that a transaction happened, that a service happened. So really, proving something becomes a very important service of the blockchain. At the very low levels, you have proof in a consensus. This is actually the actual blockchain protocol. But then you can have proof as a service, and you can have proof in a service. So proof as a service, as an example, you can have proof of assets, proof of ownerships, proof of provenance, for example, for the supply chain, to ensure that certain goods have come from where they are supposed to come, so there's no fraud. And you can follow the whole supply chain of a particular product from where it was shipped, where it was manufactured, where it got on the boat, and when it arrived. And there's going to be a whole range of services that are really, so you can go and check land registry. So why do we have to rely on some escrow service to check the land registry or a particular deed transfer, whereas we can have that, all of that reside on the blockchain? Because the blockchain is a great mechanism to have a chain of custody. So once you have ownership, once you register a particular ownership of a title, of a house, of a land, of whatever asset that you own, if you start to register it on the blockchain, then if you transfer that ownership, you also register that on the blockchain, and the chain continues, and it is all immutable, and you can go and check it at any point in time. In the same way as today, we go on Google, and if you think about it, if you want to check for information today, if you want to check for service on Google, you're going to go on the blockchain. I'm not sure what the term will be. It will not be Googling, it will be something else. And you will go there to just check for the authenticity of a particular ownership. You will check for the provenance of a particular product. You will check for the actual fact that was that person married to this person. You will check for assets. And that's going to be the next level of what I call dial tone trust services on the blockchain. So I'm looking forward to seeing more of these services. I talked to you earlier about decentralized applications, and I want to give you an application that I've been involved with, OpenBazaar, as the investor and on the board of OpenBazaar. But they are a very large-scale decentralized application that is sitting on the Bitcoin blockchain. But it does not use the web. It only uses the internet. So if in OpenBazaar, you start by downloading a particular piece of software, and it sits on your desktop, and you interact with it directly from that application. You do not use your web browser to interact as a client on OpenBazaar. So it is really a peer-to-peer application. And this is an example of many other applications that we will see going forward, whether they sit on the Bitcoin blockchain or on the Ethereum blockchain or on any other blockchains. And the advantage of this, so OpenBazaar is like having eBay without eBay. The advantage of OpenBazaar, as an example, is that you save in transaction fees and you save in credit card fees because trading becomes free. And here is a testimony from somebody that has been using OpenBazaar. They've made 20 purchases, and it only cost them $1.40 in terms of fees as a whole. So you can imagine the potential savings that are possible when we have peer-to-peer services that do not include transaction fees, that do not include listing fees or licensing fees. And this is really the promise of decentralized applications, where previous middlemen, previous intermediaries used to take a cut. And maybe now we can question it by the decentralization. So decentralization is really about three pillars I like to call trust, wealth, and information as the three pillars of decentralization. And they are all about to get disrupted, starting with trust and all of the trust-based services, wealth and wealth creation, and then information that is getting used. and a lot of services around information that is decentralized. I'm going to rush through the last two slides. Decentralization looks like, I'm not going to spend too much time on that one. It's in the book, but you know decentralization because you are involved in it. But it really is about having less intermediaries or no intermediaries delaying anything. It is really about peer-to-peer transactions. It is really about resiliency against attacks, because you cannot attack anymore one single node. You cannot attack a center anymore. Even if a few nodes go down, the rest of the network continues to be live and to be strong. And this is the basics of a Bitcoin blockchain, of an Ethereum blockchain, or of any other blockchains going forward. In closing, I want to talk about some of the applications. So another question is to, like, what can you do with a blockchain, and where is it going into the future? So again, in the same way as the internet, if you think about the impact of the internet on us in the last 20 years, what has happened? We've had new companies that have emerged, companies like Amazon, companies like eBay, using them as an internet type of company, and many others that did not exist before. And even Facebook could not exist if the internet wasn't there. And then by today, by the way, we don't know who are the Amazons and the eBays and the Facebooks of the blockchain. We are still so early that there is no clear emerging company that are going to be the next new companies that will be big on the blockchain. The second aspect is that we innovated with the internet inside companies. And then some industries were threatened or transformed with the internet. Example, publishing or financial services. They were very much impacted by the internet. And then in some other ways, the internet was just used as just technology, as a development platform. Think about how many Java developers there are today, over 10 million. Now, if you think about the analogy with the blockchain, we're still very early. Do you know how many blockchain developers there are in the world? About 5,000. And that's compared to the 10 million that know Java. So we're still very early in that stage. So if you were to think about, so what can I do? Where can I apply the blockchain? So here's the list of 13 different places. You can think about chain in a generic manner. So think about all the different places where an intermediary is being replaced or could be replaced, where the trust is shifting, where you can shift the trust from one another by blockchain. Bundling and unbundling service, because a part then can be transferred to the blockchain. Think about how value is now, because value is now not just money. Could be any asset. Any financial instrument is now an asset that can move on the blockchain. We did not have that before. We could not move any assets from one place to another without risking the double spend. And what Bitcoin solved not just for Bitcoin, but for any blockchain, they solved this double spend issue, which means that you can send now money, you can send currency, and you can send it from one owner to another, and you are sure that there's no duplication of ownership. Think about decentralized governance. All of this activity in the DAO space, the distributed autonomous organization space, where they are automating the governance and the operations of small organizations. Think about new legal frameworks that could be challenged, could be changed. Think about creating and issuing digital assets on the blockchain. Think about embedding trust rules inside of transactions. Think about having smart contracts that simulate the actual agreements, but inside of a transaction. So you can have if this, then that in a logical manner, but all of this is done on the blockchain. Think about implementing digital signatures and what they enable in terms of multi-sig, in terms of having a particular action take place only if, let's say, there are 3 signatures that are authenticated on the network. Think about all of the different services that can initiate a proof of something, proof of records, proof of transactions, proof of a process that has happened, proof of something being stored, and the list goes on. Verifying authenticities of maybe proof of authorities, maybe to prove that I have a license or to prove that I have a particular competency. Number 11, proving our digital identities. There is going to be a lot of work, and there is a lot of work right now going on in the area of digital identities. There's close to a dozen startups that are each tackling the e-identity part on the blockchain in a different way. And each one of them will need some applications to provide the digital identities, to bring them to life. And some examples would include voting, for example. There is an application that's being developed and deployed in Estonia that is using digital identities on the blockchain for health records and for voting. Number 12, escrow services, custodial services of all sorts can now be on the blockchain. And then finally, the smart things element, the Internet of Things, all of those could be on the blockchain. An example is, you've probably heard of a company called Slockit. There is a pilot with RWE out of Germany in the energy space where they plan on putting a little device on electric cars. And when those cars are stationed, let's say, and stopped at a red light, they can be charging. And the Slockit device, in association with the energy company, can just charge the car, not just charge electrical energy, but they can charge them in microtransactions at the rate of a few cents, a few pennies here and there. And that's possible because now we have connected the Internet of Things, the smart things. And I see a lot of applications in the area of microtransactions because smart things are maybe transacting at very small levels. Another example is also in the energy sector. There is a street in Brooklyn, New York, that is implementing peer-to-peer sharing of energy surplus. So if you're getting, if you're receiving energy that you don't need, you can resell that to your neighbor, and it is all being tracked on the blockchain. And that one is on an Ethereum blockchain, and it creates a new peer-to-peer network of a small economies, perhaps, but it is one application of what can be possible when you include a smart thing, when you have a peer-to-peer network, and when you have the blockchain taking into account microtransactions. So that's the end of my talk. I hope to have given you a little bit of a feel for what my latest thoughts are in the blockchain space as we speak. And shall we open it to questions now?
Does anybody have a burning question they want to ask before I start going? I'll turn it around. I might need to repeat it because it's coming through this.
Yeah. So as I understood, blockchain don't continue this like Google, Facebook, now blockchains, but blockchain somehow replace search engines like Google. Is it true? How to consider this evolution?
So the question is whether the blockchain is going to replace networks like Google. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, at least in some sense, yeah. Yeah.
Well, no, I don't think it's going to replace Google. I was giving this analogy as a way to just saying that we will have the same ease of use. We should have eventually the same ease of use that we use Google today. There will be another parallel set of services that will concern themselves with checking things, authenticating things, verifying things, proving things, services and processes. So I don't think it's going to replace Google. It's going to be another complementary set of services. And whether Google offers them or whether somebody else offers them, or it could be a number of many different players that will offer them. So that was what I meant really. It's a complementary set. And perhaps it is not going to be just one company that offers that. Today, when you search, obviously Google is the main service provider, but the blockchain may not unravel that in the same way because it's all about decentralization. So decentralization is really against anything that is centralized. So I would imagine that every company, every website of the future will have an element of a blockchain service that is included in it of that service. So in the same way as today, you go in and check for, you might check for today you check for your online bank account. You may check for other things that have a more significant trust component in that checking, where you're checking really titles and ownerships. You're checking the validity of particular transactions. So it goes beyond what we see today and what we can do with online.
Okay, brilliant. Everybody else got a question? Yeah, I'll sit around. I might need to repeat it.
Yeah, sure. Hi there. Okay, so you talked a bit about banks, large financial companies implementing private blockchains. So what they're trying to do is optimize little parts of themselves. Then on the other hand, you talked about the real beauty of the decentralized, cooperative, if you like, essence of blockchains like Bitcoin or your bizarre marketplace. So my question is, if I kind of see it as a competition, I see the banks are going to look for ways to use blockchain to improve their existing services but maintain control. And there'll be an almost parallel where people will use clients like Bitcoin and they will not need a centralized controlling body. Where do you see the future? Who do you think will win? Do you think we'll maintain the status quo, or do you think banks will become irrelevant?
Okay, I don't know whether you heard all that.
Yes, I have, actually.
Brilliant.
Thank you. It's a good question. In my book, I cover part of that. There's a chapter devoted to financial services. By the way, how many of you have a copy and have gone through it? What is that, 20%?
Ish. Yeah.
So you know what you have to do after this call? You have to go on Amazon. It's available in the UK now. So I think the banks are challenged right now. The low-hanging fruit for them is seeing the blockchain as a technology only. And they are using that technology to save money and to speed up some of the processes that they have, and to use it in some back end, so it kind of affects the back end aspects of their operations. I'm not saying this is bad. It's a good entry point. It is the low-hanging fruit. It is what they can do today without changing their business, the regulation that is around their business. So the question here that is out there in the open is, will they stop there, or will they be able to innovate beyond just using the blockchain as a technology enabler to improve themselves? And I've been saying this, the banks do not want to change themselves, but they are okay improving themselves. They can understand how to make improvements of 10%, 20%, how to save money here, how to make something a little bit faster there, and to create services and to be innovative. Their interpretation of innovation is to innovate within the confines of their regulatory walls. So that is limited. Now, the challenge for them is some of them will want to innovate outside, but I think the minority will innovate outside. And in the long term, what's going to happen is two things. There will be blockchain-based companies that will start to challenge on some of these services, whether it is on the business-to-business aspect, like Clearmatics as an example, which is a version network that is really starting from scratch, can exist in markets. On the consumer side, primarily the exchanges right now. If you think about it, the Bitcoin exchanges are another form of bank because they allow us to manipulate our money, although it is just cryptocurrency. I've predicted that this year, one of the banks around the world, and I know that for a fact, there is a bank around the world that will announce that they will support Bitcoin. And as a result, others will follow. I think the banks are waiting to see who's going to blink first. Enter a bank and you talk Bitcoin, it's like a dirty word. You're not allowed to talk Bitcoin because Bitcoin is, and the banks are not allowed to move money on networks that they don't own or partially own or have control.
I think you might have already won that bet because Santander a couple of weeks ago are allowing their internal employees to transfer in Bitcoin. So technically, sort of using it, but
Okay, yes, I had heard something about Santander. There's another bank in another part of the world that is going to announce something before the end of the year. But Santander has been known to be very innovative. Check back and see the extent of that implementation. But definitely, the trend, the writing is on the wall. They will have to accept cryptocurrencies in the long term because of the benefits that they have. And because if they don't, then the exchanges on the outside are going to get bigger and bigger. And the banks in the long term will become more like backends. And that's one version of the future that I believe in. If you think about it today, when you connect your smartphone to Uber, when you connect your bank account to PayPal, when you connect your bank account to Eventbrite, and there are many, many services like that, you're really pulling money out of your bank account without even visiting the bank, without even going to your online bank account. So the smartphone and all these services are really manipulating money, and the banks become like back ends that service all of these peripheral services that are either coming on a smartphone, or even like when you use Apple Pay and you pay with your smartphone, you're pulling money from your bank account, but you're not touching it. And we're going to see more and more of that. And the banks will become more like back ends unless they innovate with new services. Because we all want now, we want instantaneous transfers. We want to be able to do business globally without barriers. And very few banks really give you that. You have to go to an exchange to really taste what it's like to send money across the world and have the other person receive it in 5 minutes or 10 minutes and having to pay almost nothing for it.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, Clayton Christensen said the worst place to innovate your business model is from within your existing business model, so the opportunities for for startups and other businesses, other banks, etc., to start looking into what other people are doing and developing. I feel is huge. I just wanted to mention one thing, I think, from your book as well. I'll get my head on screen so it's not a disembodied face. I love your concept of putting the word atomic to explain the power behind the blockchain. It's a very easy way to remember it. I can say what each of them are, but perhaps you would like to do that since it's your phrase.
Sure. I had that slide that I took it out because I didn't want to have too many slides. Yeah, I mean, this is one way to think about what the blockchain is impacting. And let me see if I remember it. Assets. T is for trust. O is for ownerships. M is for what is the M for? Money, yes. I is for
identity. Sorry,
identities, yes. And C is for
programmable contracts, I guess. Is it?
So contractual aspect and legal aspects.
Yeah.
So if you remember atomic and try to remember what each of the letters stand for, then you can find out what the blockchain is going to impact. So that's really that was the intent of this acronym.
Yeah, and I think these kind of things are so powerful as well because there is so much, there's so much jingo and jargon around the whole thing that for people coming in fresh to it, it's hugely confusing. It's got easier, and through books like yours, hopefully it will continue to do so. But
yeah, I mean, don't be daunted by it because the same thing happened with the internet, and I was there from the early days in '94, '97. I wrote a similar book back in '97 called Opening Digital Markets, which explained the internet in terms of the internet business and the e-commerce and the evolutionary aspects of using the internet for business back then. And it wasn't all obvious. I can tell you for a fact, it took about 3 years for a generic business to be able to understand the impact of the internet. Up until '97, that was this mysterious thing that was not totally understood either. And we are in the same stages today. Obviously, you in the audience, you are much more advanced than most of the general public because you are playing with it, you are involved with it. But when you think about it, there's only about maybe 5, maybe if you're optimistic, 10 million users around the world that have used Bitcoin or touched the blockchain as a user, one way or another. And that is nothing. In 1995, there were 50 million users on the internet. 50 million in 95 on the internet. And we call that still the beginning. Today, again, as an optimistic number, maybe there are 10 million people around the world that have touched Bitcoin or the blockchain. And we are really in the very, very, very early days. And the same with the developer. Compare 10 million Java developers to 5,000 blockchain developers. And we need more blockchain developers. We need more developers that are going to learn blockchain scripting languages like Solidity and others, or even Java implementations of how to program Bitcoin or Ethereum and other implementations. And we need to grow both the number of users, the number of applications, and the number of developers.
Brilliant. Does anybody else have another question for William? Have any question? I'll jump in if nobody else does. So, to me, and I do have a self-interest in this, but to me it seems like identity is a pivotal part of this whole ecosystem as it builds up. There's so many different interpretations of what identity is. There's so many different alternatives for how identity and identifying individuals and building reputational systems could go. this stage, what's your gut instinct for what we see? And I appreciate that's an impossible question because I don't think there's an answer, but I'd be fascinated to hear what your view is on that.
Sure. Yes, identity is a very important element of the blockchain promise. And it is I am seeing at least a dozen startups in the identity space, each one of them with a different twist and a different approach. But here's the key part about identity. Identity itself is easy. You can say, oh yes, now my identity is me and I am on the blockchain instead of the internet. But the key part is about the application. Because identity on its own, if there's no application. Think about the passport as our identity, right? It is a very identity vehicle or identity proof. But the passport without travel, without the need for travel, is use or drawer until you go to the airport or until you want to travel. So if you think about this analogy, the airport and the travel are like the app for the passport. Otherwise, it sits in the drawer, it's not used. And the same thing with identity and e-identity or blockchain identity. It's going to be useless unless you have a specific application that is very much embedded in it, that is part of it. Like if a country says, like Estonia says, now you're going to be voting on the blockchain. But the number one step is to have an identity, to verify and to create your blockchain identity. Otherwise, you can't vote. If they say that, then obviously you're going to go and rush and get your blockchain identity because there's no other way. When the government says if you don't have a driver's license, you cannot drive. So driving is like the application for the driver's license. And we go at license. So to all of these startups doing identity startups, be aware very much of what kind of application you are going to be part of. And some of them are doing it straight kind of as part of the application, and I'm seeing that. But some others are just coming up with, hey, we are in an e-identity on the blockchain. And now let's think about the applications. And it becomes more challenging to have usage if you have the application.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much for that. Has anybody got any final questions before we wrap up? No? Okay. Well, I think that's everything from this end. Thanks very much for joining us tonight, William. It's fascinating. I would say to everybody, please do go and get the book. And not just because William's asked me to, because he hasn't. I've read it and it's really good. And there it is, in case you don't know what it looks like in shops. So I would also encourage people to go to your blog, your website, to read some of the articles you've posted, which is startupmanagement.org or .com?
.org/blog.
Okay, /blog. And yes, thanks very much, and thank you for writing all these articles over the past few years. They've been really informative, and thanks for taking the time. So if we could just thank William in the usual way. So it's really hard to work out because some of these things are very much, somebody will come in up here and then you're fresh to it. And sort of, I don't even understand what that is. So it's maybe not a beginner's guide to